Chapter 180. The banquet hall on the top floor was bustling with people. Pendleton Howard and Fergus Long, two of Seachertown's most powerful tycoons, were there. It was clear just how big of a deal the banquet was. With their presence, it was no surprise that the hall was filled with other businessmen in Seachertown as well. There were almost 80 people in the hall, with most of them people of power in the Seachertown business industry. They gathered in groups, talking and laughing among themselves. Everyone knew that banquets like these were usually the government's way of gathering everyone to talk about whatever was being promoted as well as giving it support. The deeper meaning, of course, was to warn everyone not to try and poke their noses in places they were not supposed to. Everyone knew just how powerful Pendleton and Fergus were, and there was no way they would skip showing up. Most of the attendees were there with the implied message that the electronics industrial park would be a project with no hiccups, and no one would try doing any funny business. Just then, a young man walked into the hall. His appearance drew the attention of almost everyone in the hall. One of the most powerful businessmen in Seachertown hurried over at once. "Mr. Faren Campbell, it's a surprise to see you here." I'm just here to see everyone. It's been a while, Uncle Walter." Faren beamed. The businessman let out a hearty laugh. "It sure has. It's been half a year since I visited your father. Time really fly by." I know. "Well, Uncle Walter, I'll leave you now to get some food," Faren said with a polite smile. The businessman nodded in understanding with a smile, turning away from Faren. Anyone who could even have a short chat with Faren Campbell was definitely someone remarkable. Faren went up to the buffet table. He filled himself a plate and got a glass of champagne, before setting the food down at the nearest table and started eating. It was not long before more people realized he was there, and they crowded over to chat with him. They were all smiles, showering him with compliments and praises. Faren merely nodded and smiled, acknowledging what they were saying. Some of the people in the hall who knew they were unqualified to speak to him could only watch from afar, curious as to who this man was. Not long after, Pendleton and Fergus emerged from the private room. Along with them were Sean James of Pride Corp and Fabian Eve. They had obviously heard that Faren was present as well and made their way over to him. The crowd parted as they greeted the trio, watching them as they walked up to Faren. "Mr. Howard, Mr. Long, hello there," Faren greeted, getting to his feet at last. Pendleton was part of the city council as well and was only slightly below Oren in terms of status. Fergus, however, held a much lower position. Regardless, Faren saw these two men pretty often. The two of them worked with Faren's father often enough, and they were also pretty good friends outside of their jobs. Despite that, Faren was still respectful and greeted them first. Pendleton let out a booming laugh, patting Faren on the shoulder heartily. "What brings you here tonight? What could possibly make you take time out of your busy schedule to come to this banquet?" "Oh, I happened to be free today and heard that Seacher Hotel has a fantastic buffet. I'm just here to freeload off the food," Faren snickered. Pendleton laughed, his gaze flashing for a split second before asking, "How's your father?" "I didn't tell my dad I was coming, Mr. Howard. Like I said, I'm just here for the food. You can talk to him if there's anything you need." "I don't know anything." Faren held up his hands playfully. Pendleton barked out a laugh. "Young man, of course your father would know about a public event like this. He's given the green light. Don't worry. I'm just asking you if work has been all right these days." The two of them exchanged a few more lines, and Pendleton was certain that Faren was not here because of Oren. But with Faren's status, there was no way he was actually there just for free food. Chapter 181. Pendleton was an experienced politician, so he was well aware of Faren and what he represented. Although Faren sat there silently, his silence conveyed a certain attitude. However, Pendleton was unsure of what exact stance Faren had at the moment. Pendleton's goal was to find out why Faren had come. Faren chuckled and said, "My work is all right, but the project you're overseeing is quite impressive, Mr. Howard. It's boosting the economy and providing jobs in Seachertown." "Congratulations." Pendleton smiled and replied, "This is all thanks to your father's vision. He supported me from the beginning, which is why the project was able to be finalized so quickly. I must really thank your father." "I'm not sure, but it's still the fruits of your labor, Mr. Howard. "You're being too humble," said Faren with a laugh. Pendleton was certain that Faren did not have any objections regarding the industrial park project. He felt relieved. It did not matter if Faren had other motives, so he decided to let Faren be. He would step in if necessary to support Faren. Supporting Faren means supporting Faren Campbell. That was something everyone knew. Pendleton changed the subject and asked in a low voice, "I heard that you and Rupert solved a big case in Harvest County. I happened to come across it, so there's no reason for me to not take part in it," replied Faren with a smile. Pendleton patted Faren on the shoulder and exclaimed, "Well done. You and Rupert can move on to official positions once this matter is settled. You youngsters should be proactive." "Thank you, Mr. Howard." Faren kept nodding appreciatively. Pendleton smiled. He waved to Sean and Fabian to come over and then said, "Let me introduce you. This is Sean James, the general manager of Pride Corp, and Fabian Eve, a board member of Pride Corp. This is Faren Campbell, the only son of Faren Campbell of Cardis Province. Please get acquainted. You're all outstanding individuals, and I'm confident you'll all get along well." Faren looked up. Sean was in his 30s and had tan skin. However, he had a sharp look about him. Meanwhile, Fabian was in his 50s with a well-toned body, giving him a powerful presence wherever he went. Sean and Fabian knew who Faren was. They were aware of his silver spoon. Businessmen had to be humble before someone like Faren, no matter how successful they were. Businessmen had money, but Faren represented some sort of authority. It was like he was an embodiment of authority. If anyone went against this authority, having all the money in the world would mean nothing, as they would not have the chance to spend it. Money might be able to grant someone power, but when it comes to a conflict between money and power, the one with power would always end up being the winner. They were experienced businessmen, so they hurriedly shook hands with Faren with bright smiles on their faces. Faren shook hands with them and nodded in a friendly manner too. After exchanging greetings, Pendleton said, "All right, the cocktail party is about to start. Help yourself to the food. Don't tell your father that you left my place hungry when you go back. I'll make sure to eat well." "Don't worry, Mr. Howard," replied Faren with a smile. Pendleton nodded and left with Sean and Fabian. Faren continued to help himself to the buffet. Fay and Wilbur arrived after a short while. They found seats in a comer and sat down silently. Fay was quite important in the Seatratown business circle. People immediately came to greet her. However, most people did not recognize Wilbur. They were curious about Fay showing up with a male companion. This young man has a mediocre appearance, yet he managed to become her companion. There might be more to this situation than meets the eye. People speculated about his identity, but everyone was smart enough to not pry. They settled for a simple greeting. Faren saw Wilbur and Fay, and Wilbur noticed him too. Their eyes met briefly, but there was no reaction from Wilbur, so Faren continued to eat. He felt like a good meal was the priority, regardless of whatever might happen later. Chapter 182. Not long after Fay and Wilbur had taken their seats, Fabian and Sean came up to them. Fabian frowned as he looked at Wilbur, then asked, "What are you doing here? Have I not made myself clear?" "Fay insisted on bringing me along, so I can't help it," said Wilbur in a neutral tone. Sean glanced at Fay at that moment, his eyes giving off a surprised look. He saw photos of Fay before, but he did not expect her to be that beautiful and elegant in person. He had encountered numerous women in his life, but encountering such a stunning beauty with both elegance and charm was truly a first for him. He turned to Wilbur after being surprised by her beauty. He sized him up and asked, "You're Mr. Penn, right? I heard you work for Cape Consortium too?" "I suppose so. What's your position?" "I don't have a position." "Are you a normal employee?" "Not really." "What are you then?" Sean seemed pushy. Wilbur asked casually, "Do I need to explain to you?" "You have to. How can someone of unknown origins live with Miss Eve? It's so unsafe," Sean insisted. Wilbur laughed, then looked at him and said, "Miss Eve knows whether it's unsafe or not. You don't act like the tough guy here." "Dude, I'm Sean James, and no one dares to be so arrogant in front of me." Wilbur rolled his eyes and said, "There are plenty of people you can't mess with. I think you should be humbler." Sean laughed and said, Pride Corp is about to become a top-tier enterprise in Seachertown. Our collaboration with Miss Eve has limitless potential. Who do you think you are? What can you do for Fay? Cape Consortium was a major investment enterprise. A collaboration with Pride Corp would bring immense benefits to both parties. The funding for the electronics industrial park in Seachertown alone was a significant and daunting amount. Cape Consortium would do the investment, and Pride Corp would carry out the construction of the industrial park smoothly. There was no way they would encounter any issues because it was a government-led project and both sides were ensured to reap substantial profits. It was a win-win situation. What Sean said was technically correct. Fay could not stand it anymore and replied coldly, "Sean, I don't recall saying that I want to collaborate with Pride Corp. Miss Eve, your father is a shareholder and the director of Pride Corp. This is beneficial for both Pride Corp and Cape Consortium. You don't have any reason to refuse, do you?" asked Sean as he smiled. Fay chuckled and said, "Cape Consortium is an enterprise. It's not my personal property. Besides, I don't have high hopes for this project. Why should I collaborate with you?" Her statement soured Sean's mood instantly. He looked displeased. He thought that with his status and Fabian's support, there would be no obstacles in collaborating with Cape Consortium or getting along with Fay. However, it seemed that Fay was not buying it. It was all because of Wilbur. Sean was also quite perplexed. Wilbur seemed insignificant, so he could not understand why Fay valued him so much. He frowned and said slowly, "Miss Eve, that was quite disrespectful. And as for you, Wilbur, you should know that people always respect me wherever I go. The way you two are behaving is upsetting me."
Before we proceed to the next chapter, I hope you won't forget to leave each upload a like as a way of showing encouragement and support.
Chapter 183. Wilbur chuckled and said, "Your feelings mean nothing to us. In fact, we might be more upset if you keep harassing us." Sean was fuming and was about to explode, but Fabian stopped him and said, "Calm down, Sean. The cocktail party is about to start, so don't bother arguing with someone like him. You should remember your status. Fay, I've already decided for you. You need to understand that I'm only doing this for your own good. I'm your father, and I wouldn't do anything to harm you. You're not a child anymore, so don't be stubborn and just listen to me." After that, Fabian pulled Sean away and went toward the stage. Pendleton and Fergus were waiting for them. Those two were about to announce the start of the cocktail party. Wilbur looked at Fay and noticed that she seemed displeased. She seemed rather angry. Wilbur could not do anything about it. That was her father, after all. What could he possibly do? Beat him up? "Don't be upset. I promised you that no one can force you to do anything," he comforted. Fay sighed and said, "I know you wouldn't leave me to my fate. I'm just sad to have a father like that." Wilbur did not dare to speak further. It was her family matter, and he did not know what had happened. He wondered why Fay hated her father so much. He felt like it was not his place to interfere. After all, Fabian Eve might end up being his father-in-law one day. Wilbur was surprised by that thought. When did he even start having such thoughts? He glanced nervously at Fay, which caused her to frown, and asked, "What's wrong with you?" "Oh, nothing." Wilbur laughed it off. Pendleton stood in front of a microphone and started his speech. It was a typical speech about the bright future of the industrial park and how it solved the economic and employment concerns in Seachertown. It was his great achievement, after all. He had to introduce the project properly. Then, he introduced Fergus Long of the Commerce Department, Sean James and Fabian Eve. Sean was the general manager of Pride Corp and Fabian Eve was a board member of Pride Corp. Fabian was also the director of the Electronics Industrial Park project. They needed to be credited in the speech. Everyone applauded after the speech as a form of congratulations. After that, it was time for networking. All the prominent business figures approached Sean and Fabian. They raised their glasses for toasts and engaged the two in lively conversations. They were all elites in the business circle who exuded confidence and price. A wonderful conversation with these big shots could lead to a billion-dollar deal. It was money that ordinary people could only dream of in their lifetime. Wilbur felt inspired. Society was indeed stratified. Elites and ordinary people inhabited two entirely different worlds. Elites made money by simple decisions, where a few words could result in fortunes worth billions. However, ordinary people, especially farmers, would have to work their socks off. Their lives revolved around hard work, simply achieving sustenance, and living without illnesses until old age was considered an accomplishment. Few people could be like Wilbur, attaining this level of wealth and power from a humble background. Soon, Pendleton's secretary walked to the stage and spoke into the microphone. "Now, please welcome the board member of Pride Corp, the director of the Electronics Industrial Park project, Mr. Fabian Eve, to present a speech on stage." Everyone instantly applauded. Fabian walked to the stage and offered everyone a bow in appreciation. Then he said, "Thank you, everyone. I, Fabian Eve, will be in Seachertown from now on. It is my pleasure." Everyone applauded again. Then, Fabian continued to say, "I have an announcement to make aside from the Electronics Industrial Park project. Please allow me to introduce my daughter." Chapter 184. Oh. Everyone was puzzled as to why he wanted to introduce his daughter. Fabian said, "Fay, come and say hello to everyone." Everyone was shocked. Is Fay the daughter of Fabian Eve? No wonder he wants to introduce his daughter. Fay is the CEO of Seachertown's Cape Consortium. She's in control of a significant amount of funds. A collaboration with Pride Corp will end in a massive profit for both sides. Fay frowned because she knew something like that was going to happen. However, she had to attend as a businesswoman because Pendleton Howard invited her. She had a grudge against her father, but she could not reject him in front of everyone. It would be so awkward. Fay looked at Wilbur, who smiled and said, "Go on. I'll support you no matter what." "Thanks, boss. Don't regret it." She composed herself and walked towards the stage. Fabian smiled and watched his daughter get on the stage. He held her hand and told everyone, "This is my daughter, Fay Eve. She's currently the CEO of Cape Consortium in Seachertown. It is my pleasure to introduce her." Everyone instantly applauded. The industry big shots in Seachertown and even Carden Province knew who Fay was. They had to show their support. She smiled and nodded in appreciation. She had to maintain her composure in an event like that no matter how angry she was. Fabian continued, "I have another announcement to make. My daughter will be engaged to Mr. Sean James, the general manager of Pride Corp, in a few days. We will be hosting an engagement party here and I hope to see you all to celebrate with us by then." His words instantly caused an uproar. The CEO of Cape Consortium is the daughter of Fabian Eve, and she is getting engaged to Sean James. That means Pride Corp has a new private bank. Pride Corp was a leading enterprise in Endler Province, and it held a prominent status among the top enterprises throughout Dasha. It was worth around $100 billion. The marriage with Fay Eve would elevate Pride Corp to a higher level and secure its place in the upper-tier rankings of the top 500 enterprises in Dasha. It was major news. The stocks of Pride Corp would probably skyrocket overnight, and Pride Corp could profit from the stock market before the opening of the Electronics Industrial Park. The industry big shots were shocked, but they had decided to immediately purchase Pride Corp stocks. They were sure that it would bring them profit. Such was the disparity between the elites and the ordinary people. They could amass wealth with just a piece of information. An average person could never dream of attaining that amount of money. The magnitude of this divide was truly staggering. Everyone immediately gave them another round of applause. Pendleton and Fergus were also surprised, but they were glad. The relationship between Pride Corp and Cape Consortium was on a deeper level. It meant that the project's progress might go much faster. This could save them a lot of trouble, and at the very least, they would not need to worry about funding anymore. Sean also walked toward the stage when Fabian called upon him. He smiled at everyone in appreciation. Fay looked very displeased at that moment. She knew her father would use her, but she did not expect it to be so direct. It was very disrespectful, and it felt like an insult to her. Chapter 185. Fabian was emotionally manipulating his daughter. Their father-daughter relationship had grown distant, but Fabian would not let her go. Fay almost had a mental breakdown when she thought about her father's actions and what happened to her mother, causing her to shake visibly on the stage. Fabian gently grabbed Fay and whispered, "This is your future. As your father, I've chosen a man for you, and it won't be a mistake. Say a few words to everyone. From now on, whether it's in Endler Province or in Cardin Province, our family's name will be known. She could not help but sneer and thought to herself, "Wow, you didn't even ask for my consent. This is ridiculous." She would not be like her mother. She would not endure his manipulation. Fay composed herself and stood in front of the microphone, smiling at everyone. Everyone was waiting for Fay to confirm her engagement with Sean. The engagement was announced by Fabian earlier, so it was as good as confirmed if nothing went wrong. Fay said slowly, "I'm sorry, everyone. I'm not familiar with Mr. Sean James, and I did not consent to the engagement. Also, Cape Consortium won't be collaborating with Pride Corp. I want to clarify to avoid any misunderstanding." That caused an immediate uproar. They did not see that unexpected twist coming. It was simply unbelievable. How will Sean James and Fabian Eve save their dignity now? Fay had truly embarrassed her father by doing that. Gossip ran wild at that moment. Most of the crowd criticized Fay for lacking a sense of propriety and embarrassing her father in public. Fay's statement would cause Pride Corp's stocks to crash, which would incur a huge loss. Moreover, Sean was not someone who could take an insult. The consequences would be dire. Fabian and Sean looked absolutely pissed. Fabian did not expect his daughter to embarrass him in front of everyone, and Sean did not expect to be humiliated as a general manager of a major enterprise. The situation was truly awkward. Both of them looked angry enough to commit murder. However, Fabian chuckled and said, "My daughter was just joking. They had a small fight today. So please don't take her seriously." Fabian gestured for Fay to leave. That was all that he could say at that point. He tried his best to avoid humiliation for himself and Sean. He would see to the other consequences later. Pendleton and Fergus also looked infuriated. They could not believe the scandal at the event they hosted. It looked very unfavorable for them. The negative impact would be immeasurable if the scandal ended up in the headlines the next day, especially with Fay being a prominent figure. Everyone could tell that something was off in Fabian's statement. Fay had humiliated her father, Sean, Pendleton, and Fergus in public in one go. Offending Pendleton, Howard, and Fergus Long will only complicate Cape Consortium's future endeavors in Seachertown. Fay seems to be underestimating the gravity of the situation, the crowd thought. Fay did not leave the stage. Instead, she smiled and continued, "Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce my boyfriend on stage to clarify this misunderstanding. Wilbur Penn, please come on the stage." She smiled and waved at Wilbur.